What if the bread on your table had the power to shatter your very existence? Yes, that humble loaf, golden and crusty, could be your silent executioner, a weapon forged in the crucible of medieval chaos. The very essence of sustenance transformed into a potential harbinger of doom. What kind of madness could turn a staple into a snare? Welcome to the dark side of culinary history, where bread wasn't just food, it was a ticking time bomb. Picture this, the townsfolk, oblivious, munching on loaves filled not with nourishing grains but with death's embrace. What if that seemingly harmless crust was the gateway to disease, despair, and the grotesque? Medieval bakers weren't just artisans, they were chemists, alchemists of the floury abyss. Each loaf held a secret, a toxic cocktail of ergot-infested grains, moldy mischief, and the devil's own yeast. You think gluten-free is a modern concern? Think again. Those who ingested the tainted bread risked hallucinations that made LSD look like candy. Picture them convulsing in the streets, visions of hellfire dancing in their minds, all while believing their next bite would save them. But wait! It gets murkier. What if the very act of baking was a cover for something far more sinister? The church, looming large, had its own agenda. Flour was currency, bread was power. And what better way to keep the masses in check than with poisoned pastries? Control through calories, an ancient strategy that echoes disturbingly into our fast food frenzy today. Imagine biting into a loaf, only to find yourself on a rollercoaster to madness, where every chew could send you spiraling into a fever dream of paranoia and despair. The bread you trusted becomes your betrayer. Not today, you might shout. Spoiler alert, it was too late yesterday. Remember those fairy tales where bread turns into a path leading to the witch's lair? In actuality, it was a breadcrumb trail straight to your demise. The same forces that created the bread spun a web of intrigue and treachery, where bakers wielded their craft like sorcerers casting spells, manipulating ingredients to conjure not just sustenance but sickness. Join the ranks of those who stood on the brink of insanity, clutching their loaves like talismans against an ever-encroaching darkness. From the misty corners of ancient markets to the shadowy recesses of royal kitchens, every crumb held a clue to a deadly game. Why did the baker keep the bad loaves? Because the line between life and death was thinner than the crust on a baguette. Want to play a game? Every bite could be your last. Every slice could be a leap into the unknown, a gamble with breadcrumbs leading to oblivion. So, dare to bite into this history? Or will you turn away, leaving that crust untouched? Step cautiously, for the true horror of medieval bread lies not just in what it contains, but in what it represents, the fine line between survival and annihilation, laid bare in a world where sustenance could spell slaughter. What's your next meal going to cost you? The air hung thick with the scent of baking bread, warm and yeasty, a siren song wafting through the narrow streets of the village. Who could resist it? I watched as the townsfolk, faces weathered like the ancient stones of the castle, shuffled toward the baker's door, eyes glazed with desperation. It was a day like any other, until it wasn't. The baker's face contorted, a grimace of horror, as the door burst open, revealing a man drenched in shadows. "They're coming! They're coming," he shouted, and in that moment, the world tilted. Mila, my neighbor, clasped her hands to her chest, her breath hitching as if the air itself had conspired to suffocate her. "Bread! We must save the bread," she cried, voice cracking. You see, bread was more than a loaf, it was life, woven into the very fabric of our existence. It filled bellies and fed souls, a golden promise of sustenance. But now, the very thing that nourished us was threatened, and the fear was palpable, a living thing curling around my throat. I remember the day my father taught me how to bake. Flour dust danced in the sunlight, swirling like spirits in the air. "Knead it well, boy," he said, his rough hands guiding mine. But the weight of his words, heavy with the knowledge that bread was our connection to the earth, to one another, lingered still. The ritual of making bread was a sacrament, a dance of patience, sweat, and love, a testament to survival. Yet here we were, on the brink of losing it all. The villagers began to gather, a motley crew of faces lined with hunger and fear. Old Margaret, her back stooped like the gnarled branches of the trees outside, clutched a half-eaten loaf to her heart, her eyes wild with uncertainty. If we lose the bread, we lose hope, she whispered, as if the very mention of it could summon the darkness creeping at the edges of our reality. And at the center of this chaos was Thomas, the baker's apprentice, wide-eyed and trembling. My heart ached for him. Just last week, he had grinned at my clumsy attempts to bake, laughter bubbling like fresh yeast. "You'll get it, Milo. Just believe in the dough." But now, his hands trembled as he handed out the last of the loaves, each slice a farewell wrapped in despair. "What if it's not enough?" he murmured, eyes darting to the horizon where the shadows lurked, hungry. I could see it then, the specter of famine, its skeletal fingers reaching toward us, a dark cloud pregnant with malice. The villagers began to murmur, a chaotic symphony of dread and longing. "We can't let them take our bread," someone shouted. "Without it, we're nothing." The truth hung heavy in the air. Bread was not just food, it was identity, a lifeline to a world that felt increasingly alien. Mila stepped forward, her voice rising above the din, fierce and unyielding. "We must protect the bakery. We must fight for our bread." Her resolve was a fire, igniting something deep within me. I remembered the stories of knights and battles fought for honor and land, but here we were, ready to battle for something far more sacred, our very survival. As the shadows crept closer, I could feel the pulse of the village quicken, hearts thundering like war drums. The baker appeared, a titan of dough and grit, his face pale but resolute. "If we stop baking, we lose ourselves," he declared, voice steady despite the tremors beneath. "We shall rise to meet the dawn, and we shall not let them take our bread." Through the chaos, I caught a glimpse of the sun breaking through the dark clouds, a golden ray illuminating the dust mote swirling in the air. It felt like a promise, a reminder of what was at stake. I felt a wild surge within me, fear morphing into defiance. Bread was not merely sustenance, it was a symbol, a bond uniting us against the void. We could hear the distant shouts now, the thundering of hooves, the clamor of soldiers. This was it. The moment when everything would change. And as we faced the impending storm, the small bakery, worn yet stalwart, stood at the heart of our world, a beacon of hope. The villagers formed a ragged line, arms linked, fear giving way to determination. I felt the warmth of their presence, the collective heartbeat thrumming beneath the surface, a symphony of resilience. In that moment, I understood. Every loaf we had ever shared, every crumb passed between hands, every memory baked into that simple bread, it was limitless, a tapestry woven through time and struggle. And just as the shadows loomed, threatening to eclipse our light, I caught Thomas's eye, a flicker of resolve igniting there, a reflection of the fire within us all. "Together," he mouthed, and I nodded, the word resonating like a heartbeat within me, together. The soldiers emerged from the gloom, their armor glinting ominously, but we stood unyielding, a wall of flesh and spirit. They might take our bread, but they could never extinguish the hunger in our hearts, the hope that soared with the aroma of fresh loaves. We were more than mere villagers, we were a family forged in flour and fire, ready to fight for our lives, our bread, our very essence. And as the first cry of battle pierced the air, I felt the bread, our sacred bond, swelling within me like the dough rising under the warmth of the sun, an echo of determination, a promise yet fulfilled. The world outside would tremble under the weight of our resolve. Our story was just beginning, a never-ending loaf of existence, fresh from the oven, still baking in the heat of our struggle. The air is thick with the choking scent of damp earth, dusk falling like a curtain over the village of Eldridge. I hold my breath, heart pounding, as the echo of distant bells tolls, reminding everyone of the hunger gnawing at their insides. The villagers gather, faces drawn tight with worry, all too aware that the labor of their hands, their hard-won grain, might not be enough to stave off the specter of starvation. I remember the first time I felt that hunger, the gnawing ache twisting deep inside me like a gnarled root. I was no more than a child, wide-eyed and innocent, clutching a doll made of straw. The earth was generous then, the grain plentiful, and bread was made from the golden wheat that danced under the sun. But now, the glimmer of the harvest feels like a far-off dream, a ghost of what once was. And standing beside me is Agnes, a woman whose hands have known the toil of the plough and the warmth of the oven. Her back is bent, but her spirit, oh, her spirit is a raging fire that refuses to die quietly. Will they come for our grain again, she whispers, voice trembling, as shadows of last season's despair claw at the edges of memory. Fear seeps through her words, wrapping around us like a shroud. The echoes of her question unravel in the chill of twilight, biting into my skin, igniting a flicker of defiance. I remember her making bread with barley, the coarse grains turning to a mealy paste, and yet she always smiled, claiming it would strengthen our bones. I wonder, though, what can barley do when hope itself has grown moldy? Wheat is king, I mutter, though I can't help but scoff at my own naivety. It's the noble grain, the one that fills bellies and builds strength. But to Agnes, the barley is a lifeline, its rough edges cutting through our despair, its fibers a reminder of resilience. Remember the days when we ground the flour by hand, each grain a promise. My heart aches as I speak, the rhythm of our memories crashing like waves against the shore of our anguish. But Agnes is not swayed. Promises mean little when the reaper stands at our door, her eyes flash with a mix of resolve and dread, the way she carries that weight, like a scythe poised to strike. The villagers murmur, shadows lingering like spectres in the corners, eyes flickering with hunger and desperation. I can see them, each face a tapestry of stories woven with despair and courage, yet they all converge into one heartbreaking truth. The grain is dwindling. As night creeps in, I feel the chill on my skin, a reminder of the cold hard facts, rye, spelt, barley, each with their own narratives woven into the very fabric of our existence. I remember my father's hands, calloused and rough, as he taught me the importance of these grains. Rye will feed your soul, he said, but it can also bring a fever. We laughed then, so young and foolish, unaware that the desires of the heart can sometimes lead to dark places. And here we are, standing on the precipice of despair, with my heart pounding in a chaotic rhythm, every beat a reminder of survival. What if, I whisper, torn between hope and fear? What if the old ways are not enough? It's a question that hangs there, a ghost waiting to be exorcised. I glance at Agnes, her face etched with lines of worry, her mind spinning with unspoken fears. She reaches for me, fingers brushing my arm, grounding me. We can use the grains wisely, she implores, her voice rising with a ferocity that shakes the air. Barley for strength, rye for endurance. Spelt for the spirit. We have to make our bread count, every last crumb. And in that moment, I see her, the warrior beneath the surface, battling not just against the threat of famine, but against the crushing weight of expectation, the fear of inadequacy. There's something terrifyingly beautiful in her defiance, an ember of hope flickering in the darkness. But what of the others? As the moon rises high, casting a pale light over our gathering, I can't shake the feeling that our stories are but grains in a vast field of uncertainty. Each villager carries their own burdens, their own struggles with these ancient grains. They, too, whisper secrets to the shadows, his eyes reflect anguish, hers glimmer with envy. Will the bread we bake tomorrow save us? One asks, voice trembling like the leaves in the biting wind. It's all too much, the weight of it pressing down, suffocating in its intensity. Here, in this moment, time stretches like the thin dough of our bread, kneaded yet fragile. We're caught in a cycle of hope and despair, the promise of nutrition offered by these grains could either breathe life into us or drag us deeper into the abyss. And then, there's Thomas, a boy barely reaching the height of my waist, staring at us with wide, unblinking eyes. He is a mirror of our fears, embodying the innocence we've lost. What if the bread is not enough, he asks, and the question hangs heavy, a dagger poised to strike. Fear not, lad, I say, though my voice quakes. We will make it enough. I hear the lies dance on my tongue, but the truth is buried beneath layers of grains both precious and perilous. In the stillness, I remember the taste of freshly baked bread, the warmth radiating through the air, filling the void left by despair. The thought wraps around my heart like a comforting embrace, but the weight of our reality drags me back down, reminding me of the gaping maw of uncertainty that yawns before us. As the wind howls outside, I look to Agnes, her gaze fierce and unwavering. We will find a way, she declares, her voice rising like a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. The grains will tell our story of strength, survival, and resilience. We'll weave it into the dough. And so, under the haunting spectre of what may come, we gather our grains, each one a testament to the lives we've lived, the struggles we fought, and the battles still to be won. Each heartbeat echoes the urgency of our plight, punctuating the silence like a drumbeat of impending fate. Tomorrow, as the sun breaks anew, we will shape our future into loaves of bread. But for now, the night wraps around us, a time of fear, reflection, and resolve. I hold Agnes' gaze, our souls intertwined in this fragile moment, both of us teetering on the edge of hope and despair, while the shadows loom larger, whispering secrets of grain and the lives they sustain, reminding us that even in the darkest of nights, we still hold the power to rise. The grinding sound echoed through the dimly lit chamber, a steady pulse of desperation. Grain met stone in an ancient dance, a rhythm that spoke of toil and hunger. I stood there, the scent of dust thick in the air, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down like a leaden shroud. This is where it all began, I thought, barely able to breathe, each inhale laced with the ghosts of those who had come before me. The mill, the heart of survival, the keeper of secrets, the silent witness to the struggle for sustenance. With every turn of the wheel, I could almost see them, the millers, their faces etched with grit and resolve, sweat mingling with the flour that coated their hands like a second skin. I remember the shouts, the laughter, the arguments over the quality of flour. Too coarse, one would bark, while another insisted, it's perfect for the bread. They lived and died by their craft, their hearts intertwined with the grain that fed their families, the very essence of life itself. Among them, I saw Ilara, a woman forged from the very earth she toiled. Her hands, roughened and calloused, told stories of late nights and early mornings, of heartbreak and hope. Each grain that slipped through the millstones was a whisper, a promise, a prayer. But dark clouds loomed over her life. The mill had faltered, the water wheel was aging, creaking under the weight of time. I could feel her frustration radiating from her like heat from a forge. If only I could grind the flour finer, she muttered, her voice threaded with desperation. If only the bread could rise with the strength of my dreams. But dreams have a cruel way of twisting, don't they? The very grain that had sustained generations now lay trapped in history, a reminder of famine and pestilence. I could see her struggle reflected in the shadows on the wall, echoing the constant battle between hope and despair. As the mill worked on, another figure loomed in the background, Gideon, the apprentice. He was young, but his eyes held the weight of ambition and fear. I could see him, longing to prove himself, desperate to escape the shackles of his family's failing fortunes. I remember the first time I turned the wheel, he whispered to Ilara one evening, his voice trembling with a mix of nostalgia and anxiety. The grain fell like magic into the hopper, and I thought, this is it. This is my moment. But moments can turn dark. The mill had whispered its secrets to him, the fine line between flour and dust, between life and death. The infinitesimal differences in milling techniques hounded him. Was it the stones? The speed? The moisture? Each variable haunted his restless nights. I remember lying awake, hearing the distant cries of desperation, the mill stones grinding relentlessly, tearing apart dreams instead of crafting them. Gideon, it's not just about the flour. Ilara snapped one day, frustration snapping like a taut string. It's about the hands that knead it, the hearts that shape it. Can't you see? Her passion was palpable, a fire igniting in the cold chamber. But Gideon recoiled, a shadow crossing his youthful face. It was a truth that burned with a searing intensity, the realization that the quality of flour was not merely technical, it was deeply emotional, woven into the fabric of every loaf that came from the oven, every meal shared around the table. Time slipped through the cracks of the mill like water through a sieve, relentless and unforgiving. The seasons turned, and the harvest yielded less and less, the grain becoming scarce, the flour weaker. The bread that once lifted spirits now felt like a weight, a reminder of what they lost. Each loaf is a ghost of a better time, I remember Ilara saying, her voice tinged with sorrow as she shaped the dough, her fingers trembling. We bake for those who can't, but what if we can't anymore? Gideon watched, torn between ambition and despair, longing for validation, yet fearful of failure. I've read accounts of how they milled in the past, he confessed one night, the moonlight casting a silver glow on his face. Different stones, different techniques, they say the best flour comes from the hardest grinding. But what does that mean? What if it's all just folklore? The walls of the mill whispered secrets as if the stones themselves had ears. Each turn of the wheel echoed their doubts. They faced insurmountable challenges, yet the hope that pulsed in Ilara's heart burned like a beacon. If we can grind the grain finer, we can create something beautiful, she urged, a storm of determination brewing in her eyes. But the tension between them hung thick in the air, a chasm widening with every passing moment. What if we're wasting our time? Gideon snapped one evening, the desperation of youth boiling over. What if we're chasing ghosts, Ilara? What if we're doomed to fail? Her response was a sharp intake of breath, a revelation that cut deeper than any blade. Then we fail together, she whispered, her voice breaking like glass. But I'd rather chase ghosts with you than face this darkness alone. And in that moment, time froze, the mill's rhythm faltering as if the very stones themselves had paused to listen. The thunder of their hearts echoed through the chamber, reverberating off the walls, a reminder of their fragile humanity. I remember the night the storm hit, wild winds battering the mill, the water rising like a vengeful spirit. The wheel struggled against the onslaught, and I saw Ilara and Gideon fighting against fate. We can save it, they cried, voices woven together in a desperate harmony. But could they? Could they harness the power of tradition, the strength of innovation, the raw emotion bound in every grain? As the storm howled outside, the grinding grew frantic, flour swirling like a blizzard around them, the past and present colliding in a tempest of uncertainty. The mill held its breath as they faced their fears, and the weight of the harvest loomed large, threatening to crush them beneath its relentless tide. No longer mere millers, they had become warriors, battling against the very essence of existence, pouring their hearts and souls into the flour, the bread, the life they hoped to sustain. And so, in the eye of the storm, they stood united, the future unknown, but their spirits entwined. Each heartbeat echoed through the mill, a promise that whatever lay ahead would be faced together, facing the shadows, the whispers of the past, and the uncertain dawn. The story was far from over, it was only just beginning, a cycle of grinding, of rising, of kneading life into the very fabric of their existence. The grain silo loomed like a colossal tomb, its shadow stretching across the autumn field, whispering secrets of decay and peril. Beneath its weathered metal skin, life was rotting, twisting in a dance of death. I stood there, breath caught in my throat, clutching the bag of flour that felt like a lead weight in my hands. It was the last remnant of what was once a dream of fresh bread, golden crusts crackling in the oven, the scent wafting through the home I built with love and hope. But the memories I cherished were threatened by the unseen. A whisper of mold perhaps, or the gnawing of unseen pests lying in wait, hungry for their feast. I felt my pulse quicken, the hollow sound of my heart echoing against the silence. Each thump was a warning, a reminder that not all ingredients are pure. The wind howled, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something foul, something that sent shivers racing down my spine. "Evelyn! Get back here!" My brother, Sam, shouted from the other side of the silo, his voice breaking through the suffocating fog of dread. I could see him, a silhouette against the encroaching darkness, his brow furrowed in worry. "We've got to inspect the grain before we use it. It could be contaminated." Contaminated. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. My mind flashed to the stories I'd heard, of families poisoned by their own bread, of children curled in pain, too weak to cry. I felt the weight of responsibility, the curse of hope intertwined with fear. I didn't want to let him down. I didn't want to betray the trust of those who'd counted on us. But the thought of what might be hiding in that grain, the evidence of decay that could poison our lives, twisted my stomach into knots. "Evelyn!" Sam's voice pierced the haze again, rising in urgency. "Stop daydreaming. We can't afford to take any chances." I nodded, feeling the cold sweat bead on my forehead, the grip of dread tightening around my heart. I took a step forward, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet a chilling reminder of the ground beneath me, unstable, unpredictable. Each step felt like a descent into a nightmare. We moved toward the entrance, a gaping maw that seemed to swallow the light, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. As we crossed the threshold, darkness enveloped us. I reached for the flashlight in my pocket, the beam cutting through the shadows, revealing grains of wheat scattered across the floor. They shimmered like tiny stars, but there was a malevolence lurking beneath their beauty. I crouched down, heart racing, and picked up a handful. It felt gritty, wrong. What if this was the harvest that would break us? "Look," Sam said, pointing ahead, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you see that?" There, in the far corner, shadows moved, small, insidious forms scuttling across the ground. My breath caught in my throat, a wave of nausea washing over me. We weren't alone. Pests, tiny marauders, were feasting on the very grain that was supposed to feed us. The thought curled around my mind, squeezing harder with every heartbeat. How could we? The bread that brought comfort could become a weapon of destruction. "I remember," I said, my voice shaking. "I remember Grandma's bread. She said it was the soul of our family, and now it could kill us," Sam finished, his eyes wide, reflecting the beam of the flashlight like twin orbs of terror. "We need to act. We can't let anyone know, everyone's counting on us. What if they find out?" The weight of our secret lay heavy between us. We were the guardians of something sacred, and yet, we stood on the precipice of failure. I clenched my fists, the flour bag slipping slightly from my grasp. The thought of the community we served, the laughter of children, the warmth of shared meals, flashed through my mind. Could we let this be the end? What if we just use it anyway? I stammered, each word tasting bitter on my tongue. What if we bake it, and hope for the best? Sam shook his head, anguish cutting through the air like a razor. "No. We can't risk it, Evelyn. We can't poison those we love just because we're scared. We have to be brave." Brave. The word echoed in my mind like a battle cry, but fear gnawed at my resolve. I thought of the faces, the laughter, the trust placed in our hands. I imagined the children we'd seen playing in the fields, their laughter ringing like chimes in the dusk. I couldn't bear the thought of their suffering. I turned my gaze back to the grain. The darkness swirled, shadows flickering and dancing, and for a moment, I felt like a ghost trapped in a memory, drowning in a world where love could turn to poison. I wanted to scream, to claw my way out of this waking nightmare. "Let's destroy it," I finally said, the decision striking like lightning. "Let's burn it all. It's the only way to be sure." Sam's face twisted with uncertainty, but I saw the flicker of agreement in his eyes. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we have to be quick. We can't let it spread." We gathered the grain, hands shaking, tears pooling in the corners of our eyes. With every handful we tossed into the fire, the flames roared higher, licking at the sky like a wild beast unleashed. The heat enveloped us, but it was nothing compared to the chill of what we'd faced. Each grain consumed was a weight lifted, but it also carried the memory of what could have been a future turned to ash. As the fire crackled, I remembered Grandma's words about bread. It binds us together, it nourishes our souls. But what good is bread if it becomes a curse? The embers glowed, and with them, I felt a flicker of hope ignite, a promise that we wouldn't let darkness win. But as the smoke curled into the night sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much darker tale. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as the clock ticked menacingly in the corner of the dimly lit kitchen. It was the kind of silence that wrapped around you like a shroud, pressing down, whispering secrets of things left unsaid. I stood there, heart racing, oven light flickering ominously like a dying star. The bread, my once simple act of comfort, now loomed like a spectre, taunting me with its potential for destruction. The warm, yeasty scent that had filled the room was now a harbinger of dread, a cruel joke played by the very life I had tried to nurture. I remember the first time I watched the dough rise, how it felt like watching a miracle unfold. Those tender moments of kneading, the gentle caress of flour dust dancing in sunlight, were now shattered memories. I stood there, frozen in an unholy dance with the shadows, recalling how I had ignored the subtle hints, how the yeast had seemed a tad too aggressive, the bubbles in the mixture too angry, spitting out their secrets like demons eager to escape. It was a soundless scream, a warning I had brushed aside, driven by the insatiable hunger for perfection. And then there was Clara. God, Clara! My heart ached just thinking of her, the way her laughter used to fill this kitchen, swirling like flour in the air. She had been the light to my shadows, her warmth the balm to my anxiety. But that morning, just days before, I had watched her pale face twist in horror as she took a bite of that bread. The way her eyes widened, the brief moment of confusion before understanding dawned, like a thunderclap splitting the sky. "What is this?" she asked, a tremor in her voice that shattered me. I had never seen fear drive the light from her eyes before. "Just bread, Clara." I faltered, my own voice straining against the weight of reality. But I could feel the truth creeping in, like a fog rolling over the hills at dusk. This was not just bread, it was a manifestation of my failures, a grotesque creation born out of carelessness and hubris. The yeast, my partner in this culinary dance, had turned traitor. The fermentation had gone awry, and in its chaos, it birthed something dark and twisted, an army of byproducts that threatened the fragility of our lives. That night, I could hardly sleep. I could hear the clock ticking, each second echoing like a heartbeat in the void. What had I done? As the moon hung high, casting ghostly shadows across the floor, I felt the weight of each misstep pressing down upon me. The bread had become a monster, and I, its unwitting creator, was forced to confront the chaos I had unleashed. I could see it now, what I had once thought was a simple act of love had morphed into an abomination. I remember the moment clarity struck, sharp and jarring like a knife. Improper fermentation could lead to harmful byproducts in bread. I recalled a professor's voice from years ago, stale dreams echoing in my mind. Compounds like methanol, acetic acid, and even fusel alcohols, lurking, waiting to pounce upon the unsuspecting. But I was careful. I whispered to the empty kitchen, my words hanging in the thick air like a confession. Careful? No, I had been reckless, using my emotions as a compass instead of science. It was a recipe for disaster, and I had followed it blindly. Clara's face haunted me, a spectre of disappointment. I could see her there, eyes glistening, that spark of life I had cherished now extinguished. What have I done? I choked on the words, the weight of shame heavy in my throat. It was terrible, this guilt, each pang was a reminder of a bond fraying at the edges, a love threatened by my ignorance. The kitchen became a stage for my internal conflict, the walls closing in, the shadows whispering of failure and despair. The yeast, once a symbol of life, transformed into a haunting echo of my mistakes. I could feel its presence, a ghostly figure lurking in the corner, mocking me. On the surface, it was just a culture of microorganisms, a simple ingredient, but beneath that, it was chaos incarnate, a truth I was only beginning to understand. I turned to the oven, the heart of this culinary war, and saw the glow within. What lay inside was a reflection of my fractured mind, a batch of dough that could either redeem or condemn me. With trembling hands, I pulled out a loaf, its surface cracked and uneven, a metaphor for my own unraveling. The scent wafted up, a deceptive sweetness mingled with something darker, something that made my skin crawl. Then the moment came, Clara returned, hesitantly stepping into the kitchen, her presence both a comfort and a reminder of my failures. The air thickened with tension. Would she taste it again? Did I dare offer her the very thing that could ruin us? Her eyes darted to the loaf, and in that silence, I could feel the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Clara, my voice trembled, words caught in my throat like the very yeast that had betrayed me. She looked at me, and in that moment, emotions suspended in time, everything hung by a thread. The kitchen was a battleground, the stakes higher than ever, the fragile line between love and fear wavering like a candle in the wind. The clock ticked on, relentless and unforgiving. There was no resolution, no easy exit from this chaos. Just a moment, steeped in uncertainty, as we faced the dark side of yeast together, the spectre of what could be lingering in the air around us. I was about to pull the trigger on our fate, to step into the unknown, not knowing if this act would bind us together or tear us apart forever. And as I stood there, heart pounding, time stretching into an unbearable silence, I realized the true horror of the moment. We were not just confronting a loaf of bread. We were standing at the edge of a precipice, teetering on the brink of something vast and unfathomable. The dark side of yeast was not merely a scientific truth. It was a reflection of the chaos within us, an echo of the fears that haunted our hearts, tethered to the fragility of love and the weight of our choices. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping through the narrow streets of the city, carrying with it the stench of decay, the shadow of despair. I stood there, heart racing, surrounded by the chaos of a world spiraling into chaos as news spread like wildfire through the town, a sickness, a plague, born not from malice, but from the very bread we held dear. Bread. The staff of life, now a harbinger of death, nestled in our kitchens, warm and inviting, yet treacherous, lurking in the shadows of our ignorance. I remember the day when Clara, my sister, took the first bite of the loaf I had baked. Her laughter rang through the air like music, a melody that clung to the walls of our cramped apartment. "Try it! The crust is perfect!" But that laughter soon turned to silence, an eerie, petrifying void that swallowed us whole. She doubled over, clutching her stomach, eyes wide with terror. I felt the ground sway beneath me, a cosmic joke spiraling into a nightmare. "Clara! Hang on! Please!" I screamed, but my voice was lost in the storm of panic. I remember the fear tightening around my throat, turning my words into a mere whisper, a prayer for salvation. The water, the tap water, the very essence of life, had betrayed us. Contaminated, it seeped into every crack and crevice of our existence, becoming a silent killer, a ghost that haunted our home. Why didn't we check? The thought gnawed at me, an insatiable beast. The reports of illness, the rising numbers, every heartbeat echoed the cries of the afflicted. Families crumbled like stale bread, each illness a thread pulling at the fabric of community. And I, the maker of bread, the weaver of nourishment, had unknowingly become a monster. A memory nudged me, sharp and acrid. I had watched a documentary once about the rivers running murky, the factories spewing waste, the children with hollow eyes and bloated bellies. It felt distant, like the haunting notes of a forgotten song. But now those images were visceral, raw, etching themselves into my soul. The very water I had so carelessly used was a cocktail of chemicals and contaminants, a sinister brew bubbling beneath the surface, waiting to strike. And then there was David. My childhood friend, a gentle giant with a heart as pure as the untainted streams we once played in. I could still see the sunlight glinting off his curls, innocence embodied. But life had twisted him, and now he worked in the very water plant that had become a breeding ground for despair. "It's not our fault. The pipes, they're ancient, corroded." His voice was a trembling whisper, an admission of guilt that hung heavy in the air. The burden of responsibility weighed on him, and I could see it dragging him down, every word a stone tied to his heart. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but the truth lingered like a spectre. We were all complicit in this tragedy. We had turned a blind eye, blinded by convenience, lulled into complacency by the mundane rhythm of our lives. "David, what can we do?" The desperation clawed at my insides, a wild animal ready to break free. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt the futility of the question. We were small, insignificant in the face of a system that churned out poison in place of purity. The clock ticked ominously in the background, counting down to an uncertain future. Every second was a reminder that we were racing against time, against an invisible enemy that crept into our homes, our bodies, our very being. I recalled the old folks in our neighborhood, frail and fragile, their faces etched with lines of struggle, holding on to life by a thread. How had we let it come to this? The bread, the water, it was all intertwined, a twisted fate that had ensnared us in its grip. The thought of Clara, twisted in agony, haunted my dreams. I saw her in the shadows, a ghost of what once was, a reminder of the consequences of our neglect. I felt responsible, the weight of guilt heavy upon my shoulders, a shroud I couldn't shake. "Clara, I'll fix this," I murmured, the words escaping like a desperate vow. But how? I found myself at the water plant one night, the moon hanging low like a judgmental eye. The darkness enveloped me, the machinery hum echoing hollowly, a chorus of despair. David stood by the filtration system, the glow of screens casting a sickly light on his face. "They don't care," he muttered, a broken man before me. "It's always about the bottom line. They don't see the people." Each word cut deeper than a knife, piercing through the layers of denial I had wrapped around myself. I could hear the whispers of the affected, their voices haunting, a cacophony of pain and suffering that reverberated through my mind. I took a step closer, desperation fueling my courage. We can make them care. We can show them the faces behind the statistics. But as I looked into David's eyes, I saw not hope, but the reflection of a reality too dark to confront. "And what if they don't listen?" he asked, his voice trembling, a fragile thread ready to snap. A ghost of a smile flickered on my lips, but it felt hollow, like a mask I wore to hide the cracks. "Then we make them listen." The night stretched on, heavy with unspoken fears. Each beat of my heart felt like a countdown, a reminder of what was at stake. The city lay asleep, oblivious to the turmoil brewing beneath the surface, a fragile veneer of normalcy masking the storm of illness that lurked just beyond the horizon. We had only just begun to scratch the surface of an insidious truth. The role of water quality was more than a mere concern, it was a life-and-death battle we had unwittingly engaged in. And as the moon hung low, a silent witness to our plight, I knew we stood at the precipice of a confrontation that would redefine our very existence. Each moment, a heartbeat, each breath, a prayer. And somewhere, deep down, I felt the weight of inevitability pressing upon us, a reminder that in this tale of bread and betrayal, our choices would ripple out, touching lives in ways we could never foresee. The narrative was far from over, it was only just beginning, a haunting melody that would echo through the corridors of time. The clattering of wooden carts echoed through the narrow alley as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting long shadows on the cobblestones. A child's cry pierced the air, sharp and desperate, like a knife. I remember watching from the doorway of a crumbling tenement, the dank scent of mold curling in my nostrils. The boy, no more than 6, stood trembling before a baker's stall, every ounce of his being clutching at scraps of hope. His fingers stretched toward a loaf that gleamed like gold under the fading light, a loaf meant for the hands of the wealthy, the hands of those who never knew hunger. The baker, a rotund man with flour-dusted cheeks, flicked him away with a casual glance, his eyes cold and indifferent. "Get lost, boy," he barked, as if the child were nothing more than a pesky fly. The boy stumbled back, dirt smudging his face further, an emblem of despair. But I couldn't look away. I felt the weight of my stomach, an ache that echoed that boy's longing. I was him. I remember, each heartbeat felt like a drum, a countdown to something unbearable. In another part of the city, in the opulent heights of the manor, Lady Isolde arranged her pastries like treasures on fine china. The air was thick with the intoxicating aroma of fresh bread, baked with the finest wheat, so white it almost glowed. She smiled, a picture of contentment, but there was an edge to her laugh, a flash of something darker lurking beneath her perfectly manicured facade. "Charles, dear," she cooed to her husband, a man with a belly that echoed his fortune, "bring me the finest loaf. The baker has outdone himself this time." Charles approached with a flourish, a loaf cradled in his hands like a sacred relic, its crust crackled and blistered, a promise of indulgence. I watched, transfixed, as she tore a piece, her mouth curling into a smile. She savored each bite, oblivious to the gnawing in the depths of the city, the hunger gnashing at throats like wolves. A chill crawled down my spine as I thought of the boy again, standing in the alley, his eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. His skin was a canvas of bruises, the shadows of hunger painted him in shades of desperation. I remember the stories whispered in the night, the echoes of sickness that swept through the poor like a chilling wind. Bread, that sacred staple, had become a weapon against the destitute, a lifeline for the rich. Muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses came from Lady Isolde's dining room, the very picture of excess, a banquet of bread served with rich butter, the finest cheeses, and succulent meats. But what did it matter? The boy on the street had a mother who barely managed to scrape together water and scraps, while she feasted, oblivious to the festering sores of a broken society. "Delicious!" Isolde exclaimed, her voice sultry and sweet, but it twisted in my mind, a cruel mockery. I remember how my heart raced as the boy, in his tattered clothes, sank to his knees in despair. His stomach growled like a beast, a hollow cry for sustenance that echoed through the night, a reminder that the earth could be both generous and cruel. In that moment, the world fractured around me. I felt the crack, How could one loaf hold so much? The weight of it all pressed down like a leaden shroud. Lady Isolde, a goddess of bread, who lived in a world where health was a given, and the poor, mere shadows in her gilded palace. The boy's fingers, dirt-streaked and trembling, reached for a half-eaten crust discarded by a careless patron. He nibbled at it, each bite a desperate prayer sent to the heavens, "Please, God, let this be enough." And I felt the pulse of his fear, the uncertainty of tomorrow gnawing at his spirit like rats in the dark. "Do you see how they live?" a voice whispered in my mind, the spectre of judgment creeping in like twilight. I turned to find my own reflection in the glass of the bakery window, a ghost of what I once was, a reminder that I, too, was complicit in this divide. My heart ached as I thought of the bread that nourished Lady Isolde, the very essence of strength and vitality, while the boy consumed the dregs, the remnants of a banquet he would never know. I remember the clock tower chiming, each note a reminder that time was slipping away, a thief in the night. The rich feasted at gluttonous tables, while the hungry were left to wither, to watch the world pass by like a parade of opulence, their dreams crushed under the weight of crusty bread. And in that moment, as the boy finished the meager crust, I saw something spark within him, defiance, perhaps. Hope? It was fleeting but powerful, a flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. And I realized, the hunger wouldn't break him, it would forge him. I remember the tension, a raw, electric charge in the air. The divide, the chasm between the feasting and the famished, could not be bridged by bread alone. The rich were bloated with their indulgence, while the poor fought for survival, their lives woven into the very fabric of the city's heartbeat. Each character was a reflection, a piece of a puzzle that felt impossibly vast. Lady Isolde, wrapped in her silks, was as fragile as the bread she adored. The boy, a warrior in the face of adversity, embodied the spirit of the countless souls crying out for recognition. As the night deepened, the bakery fell silent, but the echoes of their lives intertwined, a haunting melody of despair and defiance. The scent of bread lingered in the air like a ghost, reminding me that the battle was far from over. The clock ticked on, relentless and merciless, and I knew that their stories would continue to unfold, unyielding, in the shadows of a city divided by bread. I stood there, caught in the web of their lives, the fear, the hunger, the hope all tangled together, an eternal loop that would never truly end. Because even as the rich dined in luxury, the poor would rise again, battling not just for bread, but for their very existence. And I was left breathless, waiting for the next heartbeat, the next cry in the night. The air was thick, a stifling blanket of heat and desperation that clung to the dimly lit bakery like a guilty secret. In the corner, dough lay sprawled across a wooden table, a lifeless mass that seemed to absorb all hope. I could hear the steady drip of water from a nearby barrel, each drop echoing the heartbeat of the place, a slow, torturous countdown to an inevitable disaster. A figure moved in the shadows, hunched and weary. Thomas, the baker, his face smeared with flour and sweat, dragged himself toward the oven. His eyes, once filled with the spark of ambition, now reflected the dull glaze of fear. A whisper of a chill skated down my spine as I caught the stench wafting through the air, a sour blend of mold and decay that seemed to laugh at his desperation. "What's the count today?" he rasped, voice low, edged with panic. 50 loaves, answered Eliza, his wife, her voice trembling as she wiped her hands on an apron that hung like a shroud around her. She stood at the ready, panic etched into her brow, knowing all too well that the customers would not wait. "But you know they won't sell." "What do you mean?" Thomas shot back, the shrillness in his voice slicing through the fragrant fog of yeast and stale bread. "They need it. We need it." His hands clenched into fists, trembling with a mix of fury and despair. Eliza's shoulders sagged as she stepped closer, her eyes searching his, as if she could find a glimmer of hope within the storm. "Thomas, we can't keep using the same flour. The rats are in the storage. I saw them last night." Her voice faltered, nearly swallowed by the darkness that enveloped them both. Fear was a tangible thing, creeping into their lives like the rodent invaders that gnawed at their very livelihood. "Rats!" Thomas scoffed, but there was a tremor in his tone that betrayed him. "It's just a bit of flour. People have survived worse." The lie fell from his lips like cold ash. I watched as he glanced at the sacks stacked in a corner, their fabric frayed, their contents inviting both mice and men. Eliza stepped back, her breath hitching in her throat. "You remember the last batch? The sickness that swept through the village? I don't want to bury anyone else." A shudder ran through her, a ghostly remembrance of faces hollowed by disease, of laughter turned to whispers. The bakery had become a place of dread, each loaf baked a potential death sentence, each crust a gamble with fate. Thomas's eyes darkened, shadows creeping across his features. "You think they'd blame us? They need bread. They need hope." The desperation in his voice was palpable, thrumming like a taut string, threatening to snap. He reached for the dough, pressing his fingers into it, feeling the coolness seep into his skin, a brief comfort in an otherwise suffocating reality. "Hope?" Eliza echoed, her voice breaking. "What kind of hope do we give them? What kind of love is baked in filth?" The silence that followed was deafening, thick with unspoken fears. Outside, the night deepened, cloaking the village in shadows. Lanterns flickered, casting a wavering glow that barely penetrated the growing darkness. Every face that passed their door was a harbinger of judgment, a reminder of the delicate balance between survival and morality. "I remember," I whispered suddenly, the words spilling into the air like the baking bread, steaming and fresh yet tinged with rot. "I remember when joy followed the scent of baked goods, when bread was a symbol of community. Now, it's a token of our fears." The truth hung between them, heavy with the weight of their choices. Thomas straightened, his resolve hardening like the crust of a stale loaf. "We'll bake. We always have. I refuse to let this place become a tomb." He moved, almost mechanically, toward the storage, the creak of the door echoing like a warning bell. "Thomas!" Eliza's voice cut through the tension like a knife, raw and desperate. "Don't," but he was already inside, rummaging through the sacks, a man possessed by the need to conquer fear with action. The rustle of fabric masked the deeper sound of the creeping dread that lurked just beyond the walls, a reminder of the past's errors. As he pulled out a sack of flour, a skittering noise erupted, a flurry of movement that sent his heart racing. Rats, dark, scuttling shadows of desperation, burst into the open, a legion of chaos. He stumbled back, eyes wide, breath hitching in his throat. They tumbled over each other, a grotesque dance of survival, and I felt the horror wrap around my heart like a vice. The bakery, once a sanctuary, had morphed into something unholy, their sanctuary now teeming with disease. "God help us," Eliza gasped, clutching at her chest, her face pale as the flour dust that coated the air. Thomas stammered, his bravado collapsing, the facade of strength shattered. The rats were an omen, a reflection of their failings, of the unseen dangers that lurked beneath the surface of their daily lives. Eliza stepped forward, a fierce determination igniting in her eyes. "We can't serve this. Not again." Her fingers trembled as she extended a hand, an offer of solidarity that stood against the tide of despair. "Then what?" Thomas's voice was raw, each word a battle against the rising tide of panic. "We can't starve. Or we can't kill." Eliza's voice held a power that surged through her, a fierce wave crashing against the jagged rocks of their reality. "We make a choice." And in that moment, the tension snapped, an invisible line drawn in the flour-dusted floor between them. The rats were no longer just vermin, they were a manifestation of the risks, of the choices, and of the underlying truth they could no longer ignore. Silence loomed heavy, filled with the weight of inevitability. In the flickering light, I could see the shadows dance across their haunted faces, the fear etched in the lines of their skin. In the darkness beyond, the village held its breath, unaware of the storm brewing within the bakery's walls. The shadows lurked, reminding them that every loaf came with a cost, a price they might not be willing to pay. As the night deepened, the bakery's door stood ajar, a gateway to uncertainty. The choice was made, the confrontation was only beginning. And as the weight of their decision settled like flour upon the air, the true risks of their baking practices hung like an executioner's blade, poised to fall. The scent of fresh bread wafted through the air, mingling with the cloying sweetness of wildflowers. But something was off. Beneath that golden crust, nestled within the soft embrace of dough, lay secrets darker than the night sky. I remember the evening it happened, the moment when laughter turned to choking gasps, and the world shifted on its axis, revealing the dangerous underbelly of the mundane. Elena, with her wild curls and laughter that danced like fireflies, had just pulled the loaf from the oven. It was a ritual, our ritual. The warmth embraced us, a promise of comfort. I remember how the room dimmed slightly as shadows crept along the walls, flickering like the last embers of a dying fire. "Just a sprinkle of something special," she said, her eyes twinkling mischievously. Her hands reached for the jar on the counter, a jar that, in hindsight, was a Pandora's box waiting to unleash chaos. The jar, once filled with the vibrant greens of wild herbs, savory blessings from nature's bounty, now harbored the remnants of something sinister. "It's just a bit of hemlock," she had laughed, her voice a melody that spiraled into the depths of my memory, a moment that I'd replay in slow motion. I remember her fingers dancing over the contents, reckless and innocent, unaware of the darkness that slumbered within. I should have known. I should have seen the way the shadows flickered, like warnings etched in the grain of the wooden table. The whispers of the plants danced in the air, an almost tangible presence, ominous and watchful. "You're joking, right?" I asked, but my voice trembled. The laughter that followed was the last echo of a normal evening. Outside, the wind howled, a banshee's wail that sent chills racing down my spine. The night deepened, and the world dimmed to a muted grey. "Come on, it's just a bit of flavor," Elena had insisted, her laughter growing louder, more desperate, as if trying to drown out the unease creeping into the corners of my mind. I remember that moment, standing at the threshold of trust and doubt, my heart beating like a war drum, urging me to speak the words that hung heavy in the air. Across the room, Thomas stood, his features sharp and drawn, an artist caught in the throes of inspiration gone awry. He was our friend, a dreamer with a soul darkened by regret. His eyes flickered between us, caught in the electric tension. I could see the storm brewing behind his gaze, the memories of choices made, paths taken. "Elena," he said, voice even but laced with something deeper, something I couldn't quite place. "Are you sure?" The first bite was euphoric. I remember that sensation as if it were a lover's kiss, the warm embrace of the bread enveloping my senses. But then, a flutter of unease pricked at my heart. The laughter, the camaraderie, it slipped into an abyss of uncertainty. Minutes turned into lifetimes. The laughter faded, replaced by a tightness in my throat, a creeping paralysis that snaked its way through me. A sharp pain cut through my stomach, a betrayal from within. I glanced at Elena, who now sat rigid, the color draining from her cheeks. "What's happening?" she gasped, her hands clutching the table as if it might anchor her to reality. I remember Thomas rising, the realization dawning on him like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "It can't be," his voice was a whisper, a prayer flitting through the darkness. But those whispered words hung heavy, suffocating the air around us. The plants, those toxic herbs we had mistaken for nourishment, had woven their sinister spell into the very fabric of our lives. Elena's eyes darted to me, searching for solace, for answers that I didn't have. Desperation clawed at my insides, a beast that threatened to consume me. I reached for her, my fingers brushing against her trembling hand, but the connection felt fragile, like a thread ready to snap. "Stay with me," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of the moment. Outside, the world continued its dance of ignorance. The moon hung low, a ghostly witness to our plight, and the stars twinkled like distant laughter, mocking our very existence. The shadows in the corners of the room loomed larger, coiling around us like serpents, waiting to strike. I remember the chaos that ensued, a cacophony of gasps and cries as our bodies betrayed us. The room spun and twisted, a whirlwind of confusion and horror. Elena's laughter turned to sobs, her voice splintering into a million fragments, each one echoing the betrayal we had unknowingly embraced. I thought it was safe," she gasped, a wretched sound that clawed at my heart. Thomas crumpled to the floor, a statue of despair. "The hemlock, the belladonna," he muttered, each word a dirge, a funeral march for dreams that had turned to nightmares. I could see the flicker of life fading from his eyes, a candle extinguished by the weight of our choices. Pain surged through me, a tidal wave of agony crashing against the shores of my consciousness. I remember the darkness creeping in, each breath a battle, each heartbeat a countdown. The bread, the very symbol of sustenance, had become our executioner. And just as the shadows threatened to swallow us whole, a thought pierced through the chaos, a relentless whisper in the back of my mind. We cannot let this end here. But where was here? What was left of us? The air filled with memories of laughter, with dreams unfulfilled, and the echoes of our shared moments turned to ash. As I looked at Elena, her eyes wide with terror, I knew we were standing on the precipice of an unspeakable truth. Help, we need help, I gasped, the words escaping my lips like fragile birds taking flight. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of despair tightening around me. The shadows closed in, and I remember the way the night swallowed our cries, rendering them powerless against the cosmos. In that moment of reckoning, beneath the weight of our choices and the silent judgment of the universe, I understood. The poisonous plants, once a mere embellishment to our bread, had woven themselves into our very souls, binding us in a tapestry of toxic love and regret. And just like that, the world outside continued, oblivious to the sirens wailing within the walls, a haunting melody that promised nothing but darkness. As the night stretched on, I felt the boundaries of our existence blur, the lines between life and death dancing like shadows in the corners of my vision. But I held on to that flicker of hope, the desperate need to rise from this chaos, to breathe once more. It was a promise that lingered, a haunting refrain in the silence that followed, a promise carried on the winds of fate. And though the night felt eternal, it was only the beginning of a far darker journey ahead. A single grain of wheat, golden and proud, lay nestled in the dark corner of a dilapidated barn, its potential suffocated by shadow. Wind howled through the cracks, whispering secrets of what once was a sanctuary now teetering on the brink of chaos. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, the clinking of tools, the vibrant life that had thrived here. But laughter has a way of fading, leaving only the silence pregnant with dread. Tom stood there, rooted in a memory he couldn't shake off, fingers trembling against the rough wood of the barn door. Just yesterday, he'd seen the telltale signs, tiny, almost unnoticeable specks, black and ominous, scuttling across the surface of the stored grain. Each movement sent a shiver down his spine, a reminder of the fragility of their livelihood. He could almost hear his father's voice, a ghostly echo, warning him time and again, if you let the pests in, they will feast on your future. But what was future worth when the present loomed like a storm? The grains, those simple seeds, were not just food, they were hope, legacy, the very essence of family. Each grain contained the weight of dreams, yet here they were, crumbling under the relentless advance of time and neglect. Tom clenched his jaw, fighting the rising tide of despair. His sister, Clara, emerged from the shadows, eyes wide and frantic. "Tom! Did you see them?" Panic dripped from her voice like water from a leaky roof. "They're everywhere. I can feel them crawling, just beneath the surface." Tom turned to her, the fear mirrored in her eyes. He remembered the nights they'd spent in this very barn, whispering secrets and sharing dreams beneath the stars. Now those stars felt distant, like memories tainted by the creeping dread of infestation. "We have to do something, Clara," he said, the weight of his words heavier than the air around them. "Do what? Burn it? Starve them?" Her laughter rang hollow, cracking under the strain of their reality. "We can't just set fire to our dreams, Tom." Her eyes flared with unshed tears, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. "They'll take everything from us." The thought of it gnawed at Tom's insides like a parasite. What could he do? He was just a farmer, a simple man raised on dirt and rain, but the land was in his blood, coursing through him with every heartbeat. He knew the risks. He felt them swirling around him, thick and suffocating, like the darkness of an approaching storm. The very fabric of their lives hung by a thread, each grain a potential tragedy waiting to unfold. "I remember when we used to play hide and seek in the fields," he said, feeling the sharp edge of nostalgia slice through the present darkness. "We'd run until we were breathless, until the sun dipped below the horizon. There were no pests then, no fear." Clara snorted, a bitter laugh that echoed against the wooden walls. "And now?" "Now we're just chasing shadows, Tom." You and I, we're standing in a graveyard of our own making. But even as the words left her lips, Tom could see the flicker of determination ignite in her eyes, as if the very weight of their situation demanded a spark. We can't let them win, Clara. We must fight back. Before he could fully consider the vastness of their task, a task that seemed insurmountable, an unsettling rustle tore through the silence. It was the sound of something moving, something lurking, hidden in the shadows that wrapped around them like a serpent. Terror gripped his heart. Clara stepped closer, her breath heavy against the stillness, as they both turned their heads toward the source of the noise. The grains, once a symbol of abundance, now sat ominously, demanding attention, their husks whispering dark secrets. In that moment, Tom understood, these grains were not mere crops, they were living entities, pulsating with potential and decay. They were both salvation and damnation, a paradox that mirrored their lives. He remembered the time when they'd lost a harvest to blight, when their dreams had slipped through their fingers like sand, leaving nothing but despair in their wake. The pain was palpable. This can't happen again, he thought, a chilling realization settling in his bones. Tom took a deep breath, the air thick with desperation. At that instant, his resolve crystallized into action. Clara, we need to seal the barn. We can't let any more of them in. His voice was raw, driven by an urgent need to protect not just their grain, but their very essence. Seal it? You think that's enough? Her eyes were fierce, glistening with determination. Do you think we can just close the door and pretend this nightmare doesn't exist? It's not just denial. It's survival. The urgency in his voice cracked like thunder, reverberating against the wooden beams, shaking the foundation of their fears. But Clara's gaze softened, the flicker of hope battling against the shadows in her heart. Then let's do it together. We'll fight like we always have. And just as the first drops of rain began to splatter against the roof, a harsh reminder of nature's indifference, the siblings dove into the frantic work of sealing every crevice, every opening where the unseen assailants could enter. Their fingers moved with purpose, driven by the primal instinct to protect what little they had left. Each grain of wheat they sheltered now held their breath, their collective pulse quickening as they fought back against the looming dark. They were not just battling pests, they were wrestling with the ghosts of their past, the shadows of despair that threatened to consume them whole. As the barn door closed with a finality that echoed like a heartbeat, Tom and Clara stood together in the dim light, a fragile fortress of hope against the encroaching tide of doom. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, the fire of their defiance flickered, a small flame ready to burn bright against the gathering shadows. No conclusion, no resolution, only the throbbing pulse of fear and determination, an unyielding rhythm that would carry them forward, deeper into the night, where the true battle awaited. The aroma overwhelms, warmth, sweetness, life. But beneath this comforting facade lies a pulse of dread, a tapping at the back of the mind, an echo of history that twists the heart. In the dim light of the bakery, shadows dance on the walls like restless spirits whispering secrets. I remember the day it all changed. I remember the flour, the dust mote swirling like tiny phantoms, settling into everything. The laughter of children outside, the clatter of pots, the murmur of townsfolk. A simple loaf, crusty and golden, cradled in a calloused hand. Yet, that hand had also touched the world, grimy handles, filthy coins, secrets buried in the earth. So many hands. So many loaves. Celia, a baker with flour-dusted dreams, kneads the dough with a rhythm that echoes her own heartbeat. She believes in the magic of rising bread, the way yeast transforms mere ingredients into something sacred, something hopeful. Yet, the ache in her heart grips her tighter than any apron string. Her son, Samuel, a bright-eyed child with laughter like chimes, is frail, too frail. She worries about the world outside, where sickness roams free, where the very things meant to nourish can become poison. She remembers the tales her grandmother told her, stories of bread that carried more than just sustenance, stories of illness, of death cloaked in crust, of hungry mouths filled with despair. One night, under the pale glow of the moon, as she shapes the dough, a chill seeps into her bones. It whispers of rot, of decay. The air grows thick, suffocating, as if the very spectre of disease stalks her. What if her bread, once a beacon of comfort, became a harbinger of doom? She thinks of the townsfolk, their faces lined with hope as they devour her creations, unaware that each bite could harbor a silent assailant. She drops the dough, the sound echoing like a gunshot. In a corner of the bakery, the old clock ticks softly, each second a reminder of time slipping away. It's a cruel reminder for Samuel, who sits on a stool, pale as the flour strewn across the counter. He watches his mother with wide, trusting eyes, untainted by fear, the kind of innocence that cuts through her like a knife. He doesn't know about the whispers that curl around the corners of her mind, warning her of what lies in wait. "Mama, can I help?" His voice, so pure, sends a tremor through her chest. "Not today, sweetheart," she murmurs, forcing a smile that feels like a mask. She wants to shield him, to wrap him in layers of love and flour, to keep the darkness at bay. But despair lurks just beyond the door, wrapped in the scent of fresh bread. The baker down the street, Louis, whose cheerful demeanor could bring light to the gloomiest of days, falls gravely ill. A fever, a cough. One day he is smiling, the next, a ghost of his former self, shaking hands that once kneaded life into dough. It's a chilling reminder that sickness doesn't care for happiness, that it creeps through the cracks, finding its way into the heart of their community. And then there's Thomas, the butcher, who struts through the streets, all bravado and bravura, but his laughter rings hollow now. His hands, stained with the remnants of his trade, grasp a loaf from Celia's counter, a gesture meant to convey friendship. But with each bite, the fear creeps in, a slow poison spreading through their veins, intertwining with their connections, their laughter, their lives. Each evening, she stays late, washing her hands until they are raw, obsessively scrubbing the surfaces, desperate to keep the specter of disease at bay. But what of the grain? What seeds have been touched by the same hands that touched the earth, the soil rich with decay? She remembers. I remember. It's a cycle, a cursed wheel that spins relentlessly. As she shapes the dough, she often contemplates the grains, every kernel a potential vessel for something sinister. There's a phantom lurking in the flour, a ghost that waits until the unsuspecting take a bite, only to find that nourishment can lead to ruin. The bakery becomes a sanctuary, yet also a prison. She watches as families gather, joy radiating from them as they break bread, unaware of the specters walking alongside them, pathogens, unseen, insidious. "Celia, it's just bread," one of her customers chuckles, slapping the counter, the laughter ringing hollow in her ears. But they don't feel the weight pressing against her chest, the fear that each loaf could be the end. Night after night, the clock ticks, and Samuel grows weaker. She can feel the energy seep from him, as if the weight of the world rests upon his fragile shoulders. He needs nourishment, yet she fears what she gives him. She crumbles, tears streaking her flour-dusted cheeks, guilt wrapping around her heart like a noose. "I'm sorry," she whispers, "but is it to him or to the bread?" The day comes when Thomas collapses, the butcher who once carved life into pieces now reduced to a lifeless heap. The town reverberates with fear, mouths spoken in hushed tones, eyes darting. "What have we done?" they ask, but Celia knows the truth, the haunting truth that weighs heavier than the kitchen scales. The sun sets, shadows stretch, and the bakery stands alone, a hollow echo of laughter and life, where bread once rose like hope. The smell that filled the air is now a tainted memory, and all that remains is the weight of uncertainty. Celia can't breathe. She is lost in a storm, chained to her creations, yet unable to serve them. Days bleed into one another, and the clock ticks on, relentless in its pursuit, as the whispers grow louder, swirling around her like a tempest. She must confront the truth. The bread may be more than just nourishment, it could be their undoing, the very hand that draws them to the abyss. And thus, she no longer makes the dough with love, she does it with fear, each need a battle against the specters. Behind her, Samuel watches. His eyes flicker with understanding, with a fear that mirrors her own, a reflection of the world outside, where bread carries more than just nourishment. In the bakery, where shadows dance and whispers weave through the air, a confrontation looms. What do you feed the ones you love when your very sustenance could become your curse? And as the clock ticks, and time slips through their fingers like grains of sand, the question festers, how does one make peace with a future so uncertain, a weapon disguised as comfort? I remember. The dough, once soft and warm, now feels like a weight upon my heart. It's a story that lingers, a cycle unbroken, as the fear festers and time marches on, drawing closer to a climax yet unseen. The air thickens, a palpable tension hangs like a dark cloud over the village. The sun hangs low, casting eerie shadows that dance across cobblestone streets, whispering secrets of those who've succumbed. The bakery stands at the corner, a small sanctuary of warm light and sweet, yeasty scents, yet today it feels more like a tomb. The door creaks open, a sound that feels conspiratorial, as if it could betray the horrors lurking within the flour-dusted walls. Marta, the baker, kneads the dough with fervor, her hands moving like drumsticks in a chaotic orchestra. Flour dust clouds the air, and each thump of her fists against the dough echoes a heartbeat, a frantic rhythm of desperation. She remembers how, just days ago, laughter filled this space, the smell of fresh loaves drawing children like moths to flame. Now, a chill runs through her, as if she can feel the weight of each life lost, each child taken by the creeping plague that had turned joy into mourning. She scrapes her knuckles against the wooden counter, frustration boiling over as she recalls the warnings, the town crier's voice ringing clear and sharp, "Beware the bread. It is tainted." In the corner, Thomas lingers, a shadow among shadows. His eyes flicker with the flickering light of the oven, haunted by memories of a time when bread was life itself. Now, it feels like a curse. He remembers the taste of his mother's warm rolls, the way they melted like sunshine on his tongue. Now, he stands paralyzed, guilt gnawing at him like a feral beast. "If only I had listened," he whispers to himself, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. He had been one of the first to fall ill, devouring that cursed loaf, each bite a betrayal of his own body. He can still hear the gasps of his neighbors as they carried him home, the weight of their fear stitched into their glances. Marta's eyes catch Thomas, and she sees the reflection of her own despair. "You should leave," she says, her voice quivering, laced with the tension of 1,000 unsaid words. "You shouldn't be here." But even as she speaks, she knows he won't go. They are tethered together, two souls navigating a world turned upside down. He shakes his head, the movement slow and heavy, as if the very air has become thicker with their shared dread. "I can't, I won't," he insists, his resolve tinged with the weight of something deeper, unspoken. They hear the wail of a child from outside, a sound that pierces the air like a dagger. Marta's heart clenches. A mother's cry, raw, visceral, a prayer to a God who has turned his back. "What have we done?" she murmurs, tears pooling in her eyes. Each loaf of bread she bakes feels like a sin, a transgression against the very essence of life. What if it's our fault? Thomas steps closer, the distance between them dissolving. "No," he says, and his voice trembles. "It's the grain, it's the curse. They say it's the bread that carries the plague. But it's also our salvation." His eyes blaze with a fierce intensity, the fire of a man willing to confront the darkness. "If we stop baking, we perish. If we do nothing, the town dies with us." She feels the weight of his words, the truth hanging in the air like smoke. The silence stretches, thick and suffocating, wrapping around them like a shroud. The shadows deepen, and she can almost hear the whispers of the past, the laughter, the joy, the warmth of community, now suffocated beneath the pallor of death. "But at what cost?" she whispers, looking into his eyes, searching for answers. He reaches out, his hand trembling as it brushes against hers, the warmth igniting something deep within. "We have to fight," he breathes, the urgency of his words igniting a spark in her chest. "Not just for the bread, but for us, for the memories of those who loved this place." A sudden crash from the back of the bakery jolts them both. The door swings open violently, revealing Anna, her face a mask of terror, wild hair framing her eyes that glisten with panic. "It's spreading," she gasps, breathless, clutching a handful of wilted herbs. "The grain stores, the bakers, they've all been compromised." Thomas grips the counter, knuckles white. The walls seem to close in, the weight of impending doom pressing heavily on their chests. "What do we do?" he asks, voice cracking. "People are desperate," Anna pleads, her voice tinged with urgency. "They'll come for the bread. They'll come for you, for us." Marta stands, frozen. But if we don't feed them, we're already feeding them death. Anna's voice rises, slicing through the suffocating air. It's a gamble, but we have to act. We must warn them, we must stop this madness before it takes everyone. The three of them lock eyes, an unspoken agreement hanging in the air like an electric charge. The fear, the heartbreak, the weight of responsibility shifts as they stand on the precipice of action. They know what they must do, but the specter of failure looms large, reminding them that hope can sometimes feel like a cruel joke. As they step toward the door, the weight of the word still lingers. I remember, Marta begins, but her voice falters, the memories of laughter slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. Remember that the bread is both life and death, Thomas interjects, his gaze steady, determined. We fight for their lives, but we must also confront the truth. And with that, they are no longer just bakers, just townsfolk. They are warriors against a creeping dread, a haunting that stretches back through time. As they open the door, the sunlight floods in, illuminating the path ahead, a path lined with shadows and whispers, where the only certainty is uncertainty, and the only choice is to forge ahead, into the unknown. The clock ticked menacingly in the dimly lit bakery, a cruel reminder that time was running out. Flour dust swirled like ghostly whispers in the air, hanging heavy with the scent of desperation. I stood there, hands trembling, watching as Anna, my sister, kneaded the dough with a ferocity that felt like a battle cry against the looming shadow of the health inspector. The walls, thick with years of secrets, seemed to close in, stifling our breaths, suffocating our dreams. Just a little more, she muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration, as if she could wring the very life out of the gluten. We'll fix this. Fix what? The batch that had already been deemed unsatisfactory? The clock's tick-tock mocked us, each second a reminder of how fragile our existence was, our little bakery, our legacy, our very lives hanging by a thread of crusty bread. I remember the day we inherited this place, the sweet scent of cinnamon and sugar, laughter echoing off the walls, a sanctuary from the chaos outside. But the world had turned. The laughter faded, replaced by the relentless roar of regulations that crept in like a thief in the night, stealing our autonomy. What had once been a labor of love was now a battlefield of compliance, a war fought not with swords, but with flour and yeast. Do you think they'll shut us down? I whispered, fear creeping into my voice like a vine entangling my heart. I could see her pause, the rhythm of her hands faltering. For a moment, the weight of uncertainty hung between us, thick and suffocating, almost tangible. The health inspector's clipboard loomed larger than life, a specter haunting the corners of our minds, ready to strike with a pen sharper than any blade. I won't let them, she said, a fire igniting in her eyes. I refuse to let them take this from us. Her determination was a fragile thread, a flickering candle in a storm, but it was all we had. The laws governing bread-making no longer felt like guidelines, they were chains restraining our creativity, our very essence. Each regulation felt like a judgment, a condemnation of our methods, our recipes, and our passion. I remember, how could I forget? The last time we faced the inspector was a nightmare etched into my memory. He stood there, a giant in a crisp white coat, his gaze cold and clinical, dissecting every loaf as though they were specimens in a lab. This is subpar, he declared, waving a piece of bread like a flag of defeat. You'll need to use enriched flour, comply with the new guidelines, or I'll shut you down. The word sliced through the air, leaving a gash that would not heal. We were left with nothing but the bitter taste of defeat. The irony hung heavy in the air, how laws meant to protect public health had twisted into a noose tightening around our throats. We were fighting for the right to bake bread, a simple, beautiful act that brought joy and nourishment. Yet here we were, trapped in a web of bureaucratic nonsense, struggling against a system that had forgotten what it meant to truly feed the soul. As Anna punched down the dough, her fists were like thunder. We need to speak out, she said, her voice resolute, shaking off the fear. We need to rally the other bakers. We can't let them dictate our craft. I could see her heart beating fiercely, echoing the love she poured into every loaf. The passion ignited a fire in my own chest, a flicker of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. But I knew the road would be paved with obstacles. The mayor, a man more interested in appeasing lobbyists than safeguarding small businesses, had his hands tied by interests that swayed like puppets on strings. The very fabric of our community was fraying, unraveling under the weight of imposed standards that served only the wealthy. The shadows of regulation loomed over us, monstrous and unyielding. I glanced at the window, where the world outside spun on, oblivious. Children laughed, their innocence untouched by the burdens we carried. The sun cast a warm glow, yet in here, the chill of fear held us captive. We could gather signatures, I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper. Make them listen. Or we could just bake, Anna replied, a smile breaking through her tension like dawn breaking through the darkness. Bake like we always have. Show them what real bread tastes like. The idea was reckless, beautiful, a rebellion steeped in dough and love. The minutes slipped by like grains of sand as we worked furiously, each need a testament to our defiance. The dough came alive beneath our fingers, a living entity that breathed with our hopes and fears. I lost myself in the rhythm, our movement synchronized like a dance steeped in history. With each twist and fold, I could feel the energy building, a palpable force that filled the room. It's more than just bread, isn't it? I said, breathless. It's our story. Our fight. Yes, Anna breathed, her eyes sparkling with conviction. And we won't let them erase it. In that moment, I saw the truth, the legislation, the regulations, the countless imposed mandates, they couldn't touch the heart of what we created. They were mere shadows, and we were the light. The tension crackled in the air, a storm brewing, the winds of change whispering promises of revolution. We were armed not with weapons, but with loaves, each one a declaration of our passion, our resilience, our love for a craft that transcended mere sustenance. Then, the door swung open, the bell ringing in ominous tones as the health inspector stepped inside. His eyes narrowed, scanning the room, the clipboard clutched tightly in his hand. The weight of the world bore down on us, the moment crystallizing into something monumental, something that felt like a reckoning. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, the air thick with unspoken words. The battle had begun, and we were ready to fight, for every loaf, for every crumb, for the very essence of what it meant to share bread. The stakes were high, but so was our resolve. And as I caught Anna's gaze, a silent understanding passed between us, stronger than any regulation could ever hope to bind. This was our moment. This was just the beginning. The air was thick with the scent of burnt bread and unspoken fears, a haunting aroma that clawed at the throat. It was a day like any other in the heart of the city, where shadows danced on cobblestones slick with rain and whispers of doom clung to the corners of bakeries like stubborn flour. Just a flicker of a candlelight illuminated the face of Agnes, her hands trembling as she kneaded dough, each punch a desperate plea for fortune to favor the misbegotten. The guild standards loomed in the back of her mind, a specter that threatened to choke the very breath from her lungs. I remember the moment the news broke. A child had fallen ill, their tiny body racked with fever, and the whispers grew louder, the baker's bread, they said. The guild was summoned, a force of nature clad in cloaks and authority, wielding scales and measures like weapons. I had seen their faces, twisted with passion and fear. They were not just protectors, they were the judges, the executioners of dreams. There stood Thomas, a fellow baker, whose once bright smile had faded into the creases of worry etched into his brow. He peered over at Agnes, eyes clouded with sorrow. His hands, once deft and light, now trembled at the sight of the rising loaves, as if they would betray him too. "What if it's true?" he whispered, the words curdling in the damp air. "What if one of our breads? What if it's us?" The guild was relentless, a beast hungry for scapegoats, for blood. Regulations stacked like loaves on the shelves were meant to protect, but they felt more like shackles tightening around their wrists. Every fault, every misstep echoed through the narrow streets, turning neighbors into enemies, friends into strangers. They had to comply, for the safety of their wares, and yet, in compliance lay the seeds of rebellion. Agnes's heart raced, pounding against her ribs like a caged bird, desperate for escape. She felt the weight of the guild's gaze upon her, their unyielding expectations pressing down like the oppressive summer heat. "I can't lose this," she thought, clenching her fists, flour dusting the air like the ghosts of her dreams. Not now. Not after everything. The night fell heavy, and shadows crept as rumors tangled with the rising moon. The guild's edict echoed in her mind, reminders of cleanliness, grain quality, and the unspeakable horror of the wrong ingredient. Each element delivered a promise, safety, assurance, but tonight it felt like a noose slowly tightening. In the flickering light, she could almost hear the whispers of the dead, warning her of the consequences of failure. In the corner of the bakery stood a clock, its ticking a metronome to the chaos in her heart. Every tick was a reminder of time slipping away, the weight of decisions unmade. What do I do, she thought, a tempest raging within her. Should she conform to the guild's iron will or risk the darkness that lay beyond their judgment? Each moment felt like a choice between betrayal and survival. Thomas, too, felt the suffocating pressure. He had always lived in the shadows of greatness, of the guild's giants. But now, as bread turned to ash in the oven, he felt small and insignificant, less than a mere crumb in the grand scheme. What if I'm the reason, he murmured to the flour-covered counter, a confessional. What if my hands bring ruin? But then, from the corner of the room, a child's laughter pierced through the haze. It was a fleeting sound, a ghost of innocence that sent shivers racing down Agnes's spine. It was a reminder of what they were fighting for, the very heart of their craft. The guild may have wielded power, but it was the child's joy that held the true magic of bread. The flicker of hope ignited, a spark that illuminated the darkness. She glanced at Thomas, their eyes locking, unspoken understanding passing between them like a lifeline. They were more than bakers, they were custodians of tradition and community, and that meant fighting back against the tyranny of standards that sought to dictate their every move. I'm not afraid, Agnes whispered, her voice shaking but firm. We will make our bread the way it was meant to be made. There it was, the resolve born from desperation, a flame igniting against the night. But the guild was not blind. They would come, and when they did, it would be a storm that would threaten to tear everything apart. As the clock ticked on, Agnes and Thomas began to prepare, not for compliance, but for their stand. The flour flew, the ovens roared to life, and they worked feverishly against the tide of doubt, crafting loaves that held the essence of their souls. And somewhere in the depths of that kitchen, as they shaped the dough with trembling hands and fierce hearts, they were forging not just bread, but a rebellion. Each rise of the dough mirrored the pulse of their determination, a beautiful contradiction to the fear that threatened to consume them whole. This was more than baking, it was a promise etched into every crust, an anthem against the dark whispers that sought to crush their spirit. But the night was not yet over. The guild's shadows loomed ever closer, thick and unyielding. In the distance, the haunting sound of a bell tolled, a signal, a warning, or perhaps a curse. The air crackled, tension thick enough to slice through, as they dared to confront the storm. This would be their moment, the clash of bread and judgment, of tradition and fear. And like the dough they kneaded, they would rise or fall together. The world outside faded, consumed by the fire within as they braced for a reckoning that would change everything. With every heartbeat, they shouted back against the silence, their voices rising like the dough, unfurling into the night, echoing a truth too powerful to silence. The guild could try to crush them, but they were the lifeblood of the city, bound by bread, loyalty, and an unquenchable spirit. Tomorrow, the sun would rise again, and with it, the promise of a new beginning, a new fight, an unyielding hope that refused to be baked into the ashes of despair. This was only the beginning. The silence swelled, pregnant with foreboding, as the baker's hands trembled, flour dusting the air like a spectral veil. I stood there, heart racing, breath hitching in my throat, as he turned toward the window, his gaze fixed on the bustling street outside. It was market day, but the laughter of children and the chatter of townsfolk felt like a distant memory, an echo swallowed by dread. This bread, the very sustenance that had cradled our existence, was whispered about in the shadows, called a harbinger of doom. I remember the tales told in hushed tones around flickering hearths, the old wives' warnings curling around us like smoke. Beware the bread, for it bears the sins of the earth, they said. Alaric's hands were worn and cracked, but the fear in his eyes made him look like a child caught in a storm. I remembered the day he had proudly proclaimed his new recipe, the one infused with herbs and seeds promised to strengthen the body and ward away sickness. But now, with the plague looming like a thundercloud, that same loaf felt like poison, its crust glistening ominously in the dim light of the bakery. What if it's cursed? I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips, trembling as they hung between us. Alaric's brow furrowed, and for a moment, time stood still. His face, usually a tapestry of joy and chaos, now bore the weight of dread. He shook his head. It's just bread, Eloan. It feeds us, not harms us. But what did we know? The miasma of illness roamed freely, invisible, a ghost haunting every bite. Food could be a friend or a foe, and we were at its mercy. The village crone had warned me, her voice as sharp as the knife she used to cut her herbs. You think you know, child? The earth holds secrets. The grain can carry the whispers of the dead. I had laughed then, a hollow sound echoing in my chest. I remember the sun setting, golden light spilling across the fields, illuminating the wheat swaying like a symphony. But beneath that golden sheen lay the truth, festering, unknown, cloaked in the shadows of our ignorance. The bread, baked in its blackened hearth, would find its way into eager mouths, children's laughter ringing like bells of innocence. So many hands reaching for warmth, for comfort, for life's sheer necessity. Yet those same hands would dip into the depths of despair if the tales of rot and ruin were to ring true. Each bite could be our last, I said, the words a whisper of hysteria. Don't say that. Alaric snapped, his voice rising, cracking under the pressure of fear. The bark of his tone made me flinch, but I understood. He was battling his own demons, the demons of doubt that clawed at him nightly. It's the common folk who spread these lies. Bread keeps us strong. But what if the lies were the strength? I could see the shadows of the past looming, memories tracing back to when food was sacred, a gift from the gods. In those days, bread carried the essence of life itself, yet now, it was tainted with the whispers of death. I remember the old stories, the ones woven into the very fabric of our being, where food was not merely sustenance but the lifeblood of the cosmos, a connection to the divine. The tension in the air thickened, wrapping around us like a serpent tightening its grip. What if the herbs you've used are tainted? What if the wheat was touched by rot? The thought was a serpent coiling in my gut, squeezing tighter with each breath. It was absurd, yet every heartbeat echoed with the fear that had become our daily companion. Alaric's gaze fell to the ground, and I could see the flicker of doubt play across his features. I don't know. But I have to sell this bread. People need it. His fingers brushed the crust of a loaf, trembling as if it were a fragile creature, alive and breathing. Need it? The word hung heavy, thick with irony. Or crave it? We crave what we fear. I could feel the pulse of impending doom vibrating through my veins. The villagers, desperate for life, would devour anything offered to them, blind to the shadows creeping closer with each bite. Around us, the world was a tapestry of chaos. Children played, mothers scolded, laughter rang. Yet, amidst this vibrant chaos, a darkness lingered, a shadow that loomed larger with each passing day. I would see it in the eyes of my neighbors, the glances shared in the market as they fingered their coins, debating life and death with the currency of bread. Let me show you, I pleaded, desperation clawing at my insides. Let me take a loaf, just one. We can test it. We can see if it sings the songs of the dead. My heart raced, a drumbeat of urgency echoing in the back of my mind. But Alaric stepped back, a chasm widening between us. You want to bring that curse upon us? You want to test fate? His voice trembled, the baker's bravado cracking like the very bread he molded. Fate has already been woven. I cried, the words bursting forth like a dam breaking. We're swimming in a sea of uncertainty. We have to know. The air crackled with unspoken darkness, a storm gathering, much like the pestilence that loomed over us. I felt a burgeoning dread as palpable as the warm dough beneath his hands. The bread, our daily bread, could be a sanctuary or a grave. And it was then that I felt it, a chill creeping down my spine, a whisper of the past echoing through time. The stories of gluttony and greed, of bread that turned to stone in the mouths of the unworthy, rose to the forefront of my thoughts like ghosts demanding to be seen. "Tonight, we'll know," I murmured, the words slipping from my lips like a prayer. The baker's eyes locked onto mine, and for a breathless moment, we stood suspended in time, two souls grappling with the weight of existence. The tension, thick and suffocating, bound us together in this moment of reckoning. And as the shadows lengthened, wrapping themselves around us, I realized that the truth of bread, of nourishment, was just as complex as the fears we harbored. Bread could be both salvation and damnation, and we were teetering on the precipice, caught in a dance with the specters of our own making. As Alaric reached for the loaf, a sense of inevitability washed over me, a haunting awareness that whatever revelation awaited us would ripple through our fates, tying us together in ways we could not yet fathom. The clock ticked ominously in the corner, marking the moments left until our lives would change forever. And so we stood, on the cusp of an unspoken confrontation, the world outside oblivious to the reckoning brewing within. The bread, our protector, our enemy, lay silently between us, waiting to reveal its secrets, as the dawn of uncertainty approached, casting long shadows upon our souls. The air was thick with the scent of charred grain and fear. Flames crackled in the distance, dancing shadows against the cracked walls of the old mill. Ilara crouched low, hands shaking, heart thundering, every pulse a reminder of the world teetering on the brink of collapse. The once innocent act of baking bread had morphed into a sinister ballet of survival, and tonight, the village had become a stage for desperation. "I remember the first loaf I ever made," Ilara whispered to herself, the memory a sweet ache that transformed into a bitter laugh. "I thought I was a sorceress, conjuring warmth from flour and water. How naive." Her fingers traced the scarred wood of the mill's counter, each knot and crack a testament to countless loaves, each one birthed from hope, now tainted by dread. She looked up at the flickering shadows, searching for a glimmer of comfort, but all she found was the face of Caleb, his brow furrowed deep, eyes wide with terror. They had grown up together, sharing laughter and dreams, but now it felt as if the ground beneath them was shifting, each heartbeat echoing the uncertainty that enveloped them. "We can't keep hiding, Ilara," Caleb said, his voice a low rumble, raw with urgency. "If they come for the flour, we'll—" His words hung in the air, a promise of despair that made her stomach twist. The specter of hunger loomed, and no matter how many loaves they produced, it was never enough. "They'll take it all," he finished grimly, the shadows consuming his words. Ilara inhaled deeply, tasting the ash in the air. The mill had once thrummed with life, children laughing, women weaving tales while kneading dough, men sharing stories over the warmth of freshly baked bread. Now, it was merely a tomb that housed their fears. She glanced at the sacks piled in the corner, their contents a double-edged sword. Flour was the lifeblood of survival, but in the wrong hands, it became a weapon. "I remember when I believed bread could solve everything," she murmured. "Now it's just a reminder of what we've lost." The bitter laugh rose again, bubbling in her throat, threatening to spill over like the dough they once kneaded with joy. It was absurd, really, to think that flour could carry so much weight, so many dreams, so many fears. What had they become? Caleb moved closer, the tension crackling like the flame that had lit their world ablaze. "Maybe we can reason with them," he suggested, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "If we share our harvest, maybe they'll leave us be." "Share?" Ilara scoffed, the word sour in her mouth. "With the same folks who think it's their right to take what's ours? You saw what they did to the last baker. They turned his oven into a gallows." The memory haunted her, shouting, "Chaos," the night the sky turned black with despair. She had watched from the shadows, heart-wrenched as the flames consumed the bread that had once been a symbol of community and sustenance. Now it stood as a harbinger of demise. "I remember when we baked for the harvest festival," she whispered, as if the ghosts of laughter could somehow ease the weight in her chest. The smell of fresh bread wafting through the streets, children dancing, smiles bright enough to outshine the sun. Caleb's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And now?" "Now we're just shadows, waiting for the darkness to swallow us whole." A sudden noise, a clattering, a shout, broke their reverie. The villagers were gathering, a ragged assembly of fear and defiance. The tension crackled, thickening the air like smoke. Ilara's heart raced. She could feel the pulse of the crowd, a collective heartbeat that quickened with every breath. They were ready to fight, ready to reclaim their right to bread, their right to existence. And yet, the specter of violence loomed like a storm cloud, ready to unleash chaos. "Stay close," Caleb urged, grasping her hand tightly. As they made their way through the throng, Ilara found herself caught in the grip of unyielding emotions: anger, despair, hope. Each face told a story of loss, every whisper a prayer for survival. The unity was palpable, a living thing, yet it felt like a fragile glass figurine, beautiful but ready to shatter. "I remember," she said, more to herself than to Caleb, "when we thought we could change the world with a loaf of bread." "Maybe we still can," he replied, his voice a fierce whisper. "But we need to be smart." Smart. The word echoed in her mind, a bittersweet truth. They were hungry, desperate, and yet, there was a flicker of something deep within her, a fire that refused to extinguish. Perhaps it was the way each person stood together, shoulders squared against the wind of adversity, hearts pounding with defiance. Perhaps it was the way the moonlight spilled through the trees, illuminating their path. As they reached the edge of the crowd, Ilara felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon her. A leader's gaze, a warrior's spirit, a baker's heart, she would have to channel them all. She stepped forward, trembling yet resolute, the heat of the moment igniting a passion she thought was lost. "We are not just bakers," she cried, her voice breaking through the cacophony. "We are the lifeblood of this village. Without us, hunger claims more than just our bellies, it claims our very souls." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a spark igniting in the darkness. She could see it in their eyes, the shared pain, the flickers of hope. They were not just carving their survival, they were carving their destiny, one loaf at a time. And in that moment, a collective breath was held. The night thickened around them, starlit but shadowed, as they prepared to confront the specters that haunted their dreams, the risks of bread that had become both their salvation and their curse. Ilara's heart thundered in her chest, the fear intermingling with the pulse of possibility. The tension was electric, a storm brewing, she could feel it in her bones. The world was unkind, but they would adapt, they would fight. Because in the face of darkness, it was the light of their humanity that would guide them forward, towards the uncertainty of tomorrow, where the stakes were carved from flour and desperation. The air hummed with anticipation as they stood shoulder to shoulder, a living testament to resilience, daring to dream of bread. A bone chills in the air, sharp as the scent of burned grain. The wind whispers secrets of the past, twisting through the narrow, cobblestone streets, curling into the shadows of the ancient abbey. Here, beneath the weight of stone and time, the remnants of lives long extinguished thrum with a spectral energy. I stand at the edge of the excavation site, heart racing, pulse echoing like a drumbeat against the silence. The darkness of history looms, and I can almost hear them, the faint cries of children, the laughter fading into coughs, the desperate scraping of nails against wooden tables as souls wrestled with the bread that was meant to nourish them. I remember the day we unearthed the first bones, brittle and cracked as if they had been wrested from the earth itself. Among them, a tooth. Not just any tooth, ground down, worn smooth from the incessant gnawing of something more than bread. Was it hunger or despair? The archaeologist's gloved hands trembled as he held it up, a small white spectre in the dim light. The moment hung, suspended, as we dared not breathe, knowing we were grasping the very essence of suffering from centuries past. Rosalie was nearby, her eyes wide, haunted. She had come to this site to chase the thrill of discovery but found herself entwined in the agony of lives lost. "They thought it would save them," she murmured. "They baked their dreams into those loaves." The bitterness of her words echoed in my chest, dreams crushed under the weight of mold and rot. She was a historian, yet somehow, she wore the scars of those she sought to understand. The irony twisted like a knife in my gut. She wanted to illuminate the dark corners of their lives, yet was swallowed whole by their shadows. In the corners of my mind, I can't help but recall the faces of the villagers. Raucous laughter, a shared loaf, and then the pallor in their cheeks, the sickly sweetness of the air thickening with dread. They spoke of curses, whispered of the baker's sins. What had they done to deserve this? The dreams of prosperity driven to ruin by one simple grain. Yet, wasn't that the essence of our existence? To toil, to hope, only to watch it crumble into dust like bread left too long in the furnace? I remember, vividly, the day we uncovered the remains of a child. Small bones, fragile and untouched by time's relentless hand. My heart plummeted as I stood over the skeleton, picturing those innocent eyes, wide with wonder and malice, alive in a world where bread turned to stone in their stomachs. Rosalie knelt beside me, tears glimmering like dew on her cheeks, each drop a silent prayer for the lost, for the children who had known only hunger and despair. "What kind of world is this?" she whispered, voice trembling, the weight of her empathy heavy in the air. The excavation team had become a family, bound together by the shared grief of unearthing the past. A motley crew of dreamers and skeptics, we grappled with the remnants of history. Every find, a broken bowl, a charred crust, was a glimpse into lives rich with struggle, yet impoverished in spirit. I could see the pain reflected back at me in their eyes, the burden of knowledge clawing at their souls. And then there was Marcus, the skeptic. A man with a heart as rigid as the stones we dug through, yet even he couldn't escape the grasp of the past. "It's just bread," he would scoff, dismissing the findings. "Just some moldy crust. Nothing to cry over." But I saw the tremor in his hands as he sifted through the ashes, the way his gaze lingered on the bones, a storm of questions brewing beneath that stoic exterior. He, too, was haunted, perhaps more than the rest of us, unwilling to admit that this was not merely an excavation, but a reckoning, a confrontation with mortality that we all must face. I remember how the night stretched on, our conversations morphing into confessions as we sprawled beneath a sky littered with stars, silent witnesses to our fears. The weight of history bore down on us, and we traded stories of our own lives for the ghosts of those long gone. We laughed, we cried, and through it all, the spectre of the past loomed, a shadowy figure at the edge of our campfires. "Think about it," I would say, my voice quaking with the weight of it all. They thought they were safe, that bread was life itself. The others nodded, but I could see the fear flickering behind their eyes. It was all so reminiscent of modern life, of our own dependence on the comforting embrace of what we consume. Bread was life, then and now, nothing more than a humble loaf, a sustenance, a promise. Yet it held the curse of 1,000 unspoken fears. On the last day of the dig, as the sun bled its final colors across the horizon, the tension crackled in the air. I stood over the pit, gazing down into the darkness, as thoughts churned like restless waves. Rosalie approached, her voice barely a whisper. "What if we're just repeating their mistakes?" In that moment, something in me shattered, a fragile facade crumbling beneath the weight of truth. Maybe we were doomed to repeat their tragic history, to bake our own dreams into the bread of our lives, only to be consumed by it. The thought sent an icy shiver spiraling through me. I looked at her, eyes reflecting the vastness of the cosmos, and I knew, this was not merely about bread. It was about legacy, about the haunting echoes of history that linger in our bones. As the last light faded, Marcus stood beside us, a ghost in the dimming glow. "Maybe it's not just bread," he said, voice thick, charged with emotion. "Maybe it's everything we take for granted." His words hung heavy in the air, a truth stark and undeniable. The excavation site, once a place of discovery, felt like a graveyard of dreams. We were bound to the past, entwined in its mysteries and burdens. As we gathered our tools and turned away, I glanced back, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The darkness swallowed the sight, but the echoes remained, whispers of the lost, the longing, the love, and the desperation that transcended time. I left that day with a heart heavy with the knowledge that history is never truly lost. It clings to us, a shroud of forgotten lives, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be felt. The shadows of those who came before us linger, a reminder that every loaf we break carries the weight of 1,000 stories, a testament to the resilience and fragility of the human spirit. As we walk forward into the future, may we remember them, may we choose our bread wisely. Each crumb echoes the past, and in every bite, we taste the bittersweet truth of our existence. A cold wind howled through the narrow streets of the medieval town, a ghostly wail that echoed against the stones, wrapping around the trembling forms of the shadowed figures huddled in the market square. The scent of fresh bread, warm and inviting, wafted through the air, but it was a cruel tease to the hungry souls, a reminder of what they could not have. A baker, his hands worn and cracked like the earth itself, pulled loaves from the oven, their golden crusts gleaming under the dim light. The warmth radiated out, but the chill of despair was unyielding. I remember the baker's eyes, fierce and tired, like the embers of a dying fire. "Bread is life," he murmured, his voice thick with longing, a mantra against the unforgiving reality that surrounded him. His daughter, Eleanor, stood beside him, clutching a handful of grains, her fingers dusted with flour, remnants of a dream slipping through her grasp. She wanted to weave bread as if it were magic, a spell cast over their starving village. The weight of hunger pressed against her heart, a reminder of the vibrant lives that had faded like the last rays of sun. But across the sea, in the vast lands of the East, bread told a different story. The market there thrived with bustling voices and vibrant spices, warmth spilling from clay ovens. I remember a man named Jamil, laughter dancing in his eyes as he kneaded dough infused with saffron and cardamom, the scent intoxicating, a siren's call to the weary traveler. "Here, bread is a celebration," he sang, spinning tales of feasts and family. Each loaf was more than sustenance, it was a vessel of culture, a symbol of unity, shared among loved ones, tenderly baked and broken together. In that moment, the distance between Eleanor and Jamil felt unbearable. The stark contrast made my chest ache. A haunting sorrow tugged at their hearts, a yearning for what the other possessed. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she shaped her dough, pouring her dreams into every fold, a desperate prayer for a future filled with the warmth of togetherness. Yet, the shadows of famine loomed closer, gnawing at the edges of her hope. "Will you trade my bread for yours?" she whispered, a fragile hope threading through her voice, reaching out across the waves. But the sea was a cruel mistress, and the winds of fate raged against their connection. The moment stretched like the dough they worked, tense and filled with an unspoken longing. I remember the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke of her father's stories, how bread fed the hungry and healed the broken. Yet, she was trapped in a world where the only thing rising were the hopes that fell like the yeast she could never afford. Far from her, Jamil was kneading his dough, the rhythm steady and soothing. But a shadow lurked in his heart, a fear that whispered through the night, telling him that the world outside was not as kind as the loaves he shaped with care. What if the tide turns, he pondered, eyes flickering to the horizon, where dark clouds loomed? What if the harvest fails? Each thought was a weight, a reminder that even the most beautiful bread could not shield them from the storms of fate. His sister Layla watched him, her heart aching for the joy he tried to hold onto. "Bread gives us strength, Jamil. But we must not forget those who suffer in silence." She wanted to remind him that, unlike the bread, their lives were not so easily molded. There was a world beyond their kitchen, filled with hunger and despair, echoing the very same fears Eleanor lived with thousands of miles away. The night crept closer, shadows stretching as the ovens cooled, and the chill wrapped around them, thick and oppressive. All that was left were the memories and dreams, haunting the corners of their minds. Eleanor's hands shook, her fervent wish to share her bread, to send a piece of hope across the ocean, a wish so fragile it could shatter with the slightest breath. Jamil felt that same wish begin to fracture, the laughter fading into whispers of uncertainty. Yet, even in that silence, the connection between them thrummed with intensity, a shared burden of longing and despair. They were two souls, bound by a world that divided them yet united them in their shared humanity. Every moment they spent was a heartbeat echoing through the void, a scream swallowed by the night. And so, as the stars twinkled overhead, each one a distant reminder of dreams yet unfulfilled, Eleanor and Jamil continued to knead their dough, fingers entwined with hope and fear, longing and despair. They didn't know if their paths would ever cross, but in their hearts, they knew they were connected, by bread, by life. The weight of their struggles hung heavy in the air, and yet, amidst the cold and the darkness, there flickered a glimmer of something profound, a fierce, unyielding desire to survive, to connect, to share. In that moment, they became symbols of resilience, of broken dreams and unbroken spirits, standing against the shadows that threatened to consume them. Each loaf they created was a testament to their struggle, a bridge across impossible distances, a reminder that bread practices, though shaped by culture and practice, were rooted in the same human experience. And just as the scent of freshly baked bread lingered in the air, a promise of warmth in a world defined by coldness, their stories echoed like whispers through the ages, a call to remember that, despite the differences in their practices, at the core of it all, they were simply yearning souls, searching for connection, for understanding, and for a piece of bread that would feed not just their bodies, but their hearts. The smell of burnt yeast hung thick in the air, a ghostly reminder of what had been lost, what had been sacrificed on the altar of progress. I stood there, heart hammering, watching as the last of the old bread was carted away, its crusty exterior cracked and crumbling. The rhythmic thud of the cart wheels echoed like a metronome of change, steady, relentless. Each bump sent a jolt through me, a reminder of the weight of history slipping away, of a world I could never reclaim. You can't just throw it all away, I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I shifted my gaze to Clara, my sister, her hands trembling, fingers fidgeting with the frayed edge of her apron, an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. I remember when bread was just bread, she whispered, voice barely breaking the weight of silence. It was wholesome, it was ours. The pain in her eyes cut deeper than I could bear. Clara, always so full of life, was now a husk of her former self, staring into the abyss of progress, haunted by the spectre of industrialization. I could see the dread lurking in her gaze, a fear that our connection to the earth, to the simplicity of life, was being devoured by machinery, by progress that promised more but delivered less. But what was this change? Was it liberation or a curse? The new factories loomed in the distance, monstrous structures of iron and glass, their shadows swallowing the sun. They promised bread for all, shiny loaves wrapped in plastic, uniform and sterile. No more waiting for hours as dough rose and fermented, no more kneading by hand until your arms screamed in protest. Just push a button and let the machines do the rest. It was an irresistible allure, an enticing promise dangling before our eyes, but at what cost? Clara, I said, barely above a whisper, do you think we're getting what we wanted? She shook her head, a shiver running down her spine. We're losing our soul. The truth hung in the air like the dust mote swirling in the fading light, heavy and unyielding. We were at a crossroads, our hearts caught between the nostalgia of simpler times and the seductive lure of efficiency. I could sense the world shifting beneath our feet, grinding like gears in a machine, and I was terrified of what lay ahead. The factories churned out bread in a matter of minutes, a miracle of human ingenuity. But as Clara and I watched from the sidelines, the joy of that miracle dimmed. The long queues that formed outside the factories were filled with weary faces, fraught with hope and desperation. They were hungry, desperate for sustenance, but I couldn't help but wonder, were they aware of the price they paid? The bread was soft and white, devoid of the hearty grains that once defined our diet, stripped of the natural goodness that had nourished generations. This new bread could be made in bulk, easily shipped, and stored for days. But was it really bread, or just a pale imitation? I remembered our grandmother's kitchen, the warmth that enveloped us as the smell of freshly baked loaves filled the air. I remember, the memories flooded back, uninvited, relentless. The way she would let the dough rise in a bowl covered with a damp cloth, how she would sing softly as she kneaded, her hand stained with flour, the way it felt to pull a steaming loaf from the oven, its crust crackling as it cooled on the counter. That was life. That was connection. The essence of bread was not just sustenance, it was our history, an unbroken chain linking us to the earth, the seasons, and to each other. But now, with industrialization encroaching, it felt like those chains were rusting, disintegrating into fragments. I looked at Clara, her brow furrowed in thought, and I knew we had to confront the truth. What will happen to us, Clara? I asked, my voice thick with dread. Are we just letting it all slip away? We stand at the edge of a new era, she murmured, lips trembling. But I fear what we'll lose in the process. There it was, a crack in her brave facade, a glimpse of the turmoil that churned beneath her surface. I felt a rush of anger, not at her, but at the world, at the relentless march of time that threatened to erase everything we held dear. As night fell, the factories turned into monstrous silhouettes against the darkening sky, their lights flickering like stars against the void. We wandered to the edge of town, where the remnants of the old world still clung tenaciously to life. A baker, his hands lined with years of labor, was still working, the warmth of his oven spilling out into the night, a beacon of hope. I could feel the pulse of the earth beneath my feet, the heartbeat of a world that still remembered what it meant to need, to rise, to bake. Do you see that? I pointed, urgency spilling from my lips. There's still a choice. We can still fight for what matters. Clara followed my gaze, and for a moment, her face softened, hope flickering in her eyes like a candle fighting against the dark. But the shadows were relentless, creeping in on us, reminding us of the inevitable. The machines were coming, the factories were expanding, and soon there would be no room for the old ways. I felt a tightening in my chest, a visceral fear that our dreams were slipping through our fingers like grains of sand. The tension built, spiraling, twisting like the dough in the baker's hands, full of potential yet on the verge of collapse. Will we forget? Clara's voice trembled, a fragile thread woven through the chaos. The clock tower chimed, the sound echoing through the night, a chilling reminder of time's relentless passage. I could hear the gears grinding, not just of the machines, but of our very lives, caught in a whirlwind of change. I reached out, clasping her hand, my heart storming against my ribcage. We must remember, I said fiercely. We must hold on. But the winds of change were howling now, and I could feel the world shifting. Behind us, the distant factories belched smoke into the sky, a harbinger of the future, a future that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Clara squeezed my hand, and in her grip, I felt the weight of our choices, our fears, and our hopes. And as the stars blinked down at us, I knew we had a choice to make: either surrender to the machines or cling to the warm, crusty remnants of our past. The tension hung thick, heavy with anticipation, a reminder that we were standing on the precipice of something monumental, something that could change everything. The story was unfolding, spiraling towards an uncertain conclusion, but the heartbeat of our journey pulsed louder in the night, urging us on, into the unknown. The air crackles with a palpable tension, the way a storm brews on the horizon. I stand in a dimly lit kitchen, shadows flickering like the ghosts of forgotten bakers, a long wooden table heavy with flour and salt. The scent of yeast hangs thick, an intoxicating promise of warmth and life. Yet, beneath the fragrance lies something darker, an echo of despair, a whispered cautionary tale. I remember the night the bread turned sour. My fingers, caked with dough and desperation, kneaded furiously, every push and pull an attempt to mold hope. But hope, like the yeast, has its limits, and tonight, it suffocated. In the corner, Margaret watches, her hands trembling, eyes sunken with the weight of too many failed loaves. It's the flour, she mutters, her voice a mere breath against the chaos. It's tainted. Every loaf we baked this week was a failure, a cruel reminder of the village's slow decline, the whispers of disease that slithered through the cracks of our crumbling homes. I glance at the hearth, where embers flicker like the last flames of a dying star. The fire once roared with life, now it barely crackles, echoing the fear that has gripped our hearts. We should use the old ways, I suggest, my throat dry with unvoiced dread, but the words hang heavy, laden with the weight of tradition. Margaret's gaze pierces through the thickening darkness. You mean the ways that almost got us executed, she hisses, her voice barely above a whisper. The memory of the last baker, strung up in the town square, his crime nothing more than a burnt crust, haunted me too. The townsfolk gathered, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. Look how they hang him, they'd said, a warning, a lesson. Don't stray from the path. But what was the path? I had read old texts, scrolls stained with age and ink, brimming with wisdom. They sang of fermentation, of time and patience. Bread wasn't just sustenance, it was a lifeline. It was a ritual that transcended mortal fears, threading us to our ancestors, whispering of their triumphs and failures. But in a world devoured by pestilence and suspicion, what did that knowledge mean now? I remember, I murmur, barely aware I'm speaking. I remember how the miller would laugh as he ground the grain, how the sun would filter through the windows, dancing with the dust. Memories won't save us, Margaret snaps, fear and frustration twisting her voice. All they do is remind us of what we had and lost. The truth of her words strikes like a bitter wind. We are marooned in a history that feels both distant and suffocatingly close, each slice of bread a reminder of fragile mortality. The clock ticks, each second a hammer driving into our collective heart. Outside, the village stirs with the restless shadows of doubt. People wear masks of resignation, faces etched with the despair of their forebears. In the distance, the church bell tolls, a solemn reminder of the living and the dead. Maybe we should embrace the old ways, I say, a reckless surge of hope colliding with the dread that clouds my mind. What if we mixed the flour with wild herbs, infusing the loaves with their power? Margaret's eyes narrow, skeptical yet intrigued. You think a pinch of time will cure the whole town? Not cure, but shield, I reply, my voice rising, a spark igniting. The ancients believed food had spirit. They whispered to it, begged it for strength. What if we try? Margaret pauses, caught in a moment between skepticism and longing. And if it fails? If it fails, we will need our way through this darkness together, I say, gripping her hands, feeling her heartbeat, the pulse of fear and hope intertwined. The kitchen trembles with a fragile energy, the walls closing in, and I can see it, a flicker of rebellion dancing in her eyes. Then let's do it, she finally breathes, her voice a fragile pact. Let's invoke the old spirits, summon the ghosts of wheat and water. And so, we gather the forgotten seeds of ancestors, the wild herbs that grow untamed by the crumbling paths of the village, a kaleidoscope of flavor and history, each ingredient a ghost whispering a melody. The dough rises slowly, like the horizon before dawn, and I can almost hear the earth sighing in relief, the cycles of life reawakening. As the oven crackles to life, anticipation mingles with dread. What if this bread holds the weight of our past? What if the ghosts of our village linger in the crust, waiting to be unleashed? The air thickens, charged with unspoken fears and wild hopes, as I shape the loaves, each one a vessel, a prayer to the universe. But even as I shape, I feel the shadows watching, the husks of fears entwined in every fold, disease, despair, darkness. The past isn't just memory, it's a force that echoes through time, refusing to let go. The loaves rise, bubbling with potential, a tide of life breaking against the shore of our despair. As they bake, I can almost hear the heartbeat of the village, a collective rhythm pulsing with renewed hope, a defiance against the dark. But the clock ticks on, and I know, will they rise to meet us, or will they fall flat, echoing the weight of our nightmares? I hear Margaret's breath, shallow and quick, and I wonder if she feels it too, the anticipation, the fear, the overwhelming joy that threatens to drown us. The bread emerges golden and crackling, a beacon against the night. I remember the laughter of children, the warmth of sharing, the ritual of breaking bread, a connection to life itself. But can it heal? Can it mend the fractures that threaten to consume us whole? We stand, two hesitant souls, on the brink of something profound, something raw, tangled, and impossibly beautiful. The taste of history lingers on our tongues, mingling with the bittersweet promise of tomorrow. And as the sun sinks below the horizon, casting shadows long and dark across our lives, I know this moment is just a breath, an inhale before the world exhales its secrets. It's a beginning, a lesson forged in the heat of uncertainty, as we dare to confront the echoes of the past and reach for the vibrant future waiting just beyond the edge of our doubt.